Everybody. It's 9 o'clock. We'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining. Just a few quick things right off the top. Uh, if everyone can remain muted throughout the presentation so there isn't any background noise, that would be much appreciated. There's one button on your screen I'd like you all to avoid hitting. It says present now. It looks like a rectangle with an up arrow. Please do not click that as that will interrupt Alice's presentation. If you have any technical issues, please put those into the chat feature and I'll do my best to help you through those. Just be aware that most of the time the issues stem from your own Wi-Fi connections. If you have any questions during the presentation, please put those into the chat feature as well, and I will prompt Alice as needed. If anyone has called in today via telephone, please send me an email at mfrey@pjhq.com. That way we'll make sure you get your MSR credits for this morning. And we are recording this webinar, so it will be available on our YouTube page later this week, should you ever want to refer back to it or share it with any of your assistants. Before we introduce Alice, we're going to turn it over to Mr. Clark Lewis for a little rendition.
Okay, something upbeat this morning. You're a grand old flag, you're a high-flying flag, and forever in peace may you wave. You're the emblem of the land I love, the home of the free and the brave. Every heart beats true for the red, white, and blue, where there's never a boast or brag. And should old acquaintance be forgot, keep your eye on that grand old flag.
Thank you, Clark. Very nice.
Nice job.
Thanks.
So I will turn it over to Miss Alice Miller. Alice is a longtime LPGA and PGA professional, teaches in Delaware, and is a major champion. So take it away, Alice.
Okay, thanks, Matt. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And let me get the presentation up. Okay, everybody, here we go. We're going to try to cover 3 rules today, rules 8, 9, and 11. And I'm going to keep my eye on the time. And a lot of this information, we're going to start with rule 8, course played as it is found.
Hey, Alice, I'm sorry. Your screen isn't being shared right now.
It is not. Okay, hang on. Okay. Share. Let me try that over again. Should I share my entire screen, Matt, or just a window?
Either one will work.
Okay.
Might be easier if you do entire screen, but.
All right, Chrome is not wanting me to do that. Oh, here we go. Let me try this again.
There we go.
Okay.
Perfect.
How's that? Can everybody see that?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Matt. Here we go again. We're going to start with rule 8, course played as it is found. And just want to say again that a lot of these rules, even though the language changed in 2019 and some of the rules changed too, a lot of this you're going to be familiar with. You just might not be familiar with the wording and the way that they write it. So hopefully the concepts will be familiar and a lot of this will make sense. Rule 8, we're going to start with some definitions that are really important to understanding the rule. We'll have the purpose statement. Almost all the rules have purpose statements, which help to kind of understand what the rule's about. And then this rule has 3 parts. And 8.1, the first part, is going to take most of our time and most of our slides. And all these terms, conditions affecting the stroke, will make more sense, hopefully, when we're done. Purpose of the rule, it covers one of the great central principles of the game, which is to play the course as you find it. I love this graphic. We're going to see it again in Rule 9. You might hit a great drive and have a bad lie in the fairway. You might hit an errant shot and have a great lie in the rough. And we're supposed to deal with that and accept that. I know I have some of my members that argue about the bad lie in the fairway and a divot, but this is the central principle: play the course as you find it. We're going to talk about players' actions that improve the conditions affecting the stroke. That's 8.1. It's the bulk of this rule. We're going to see that there's certain actions that are allowed, a lot of actions that are not allowed, certain actions that are, and something new in 2019, we can possibly avoid penalty by restoring conditions, okay? And then we also get to restore conditions that were worsened after our ball came to rest. So to support the principle of play the course as you find it, this rule is going to restrict what a player may do to cause an improvement to any of these protected conditions affecting the stroke. We're going to see what those are, but think of these as protected areas, areas that you just are not supposed to do things to cause an improvement. This rule applies for the next stroke that the player will make. Everything in Rule 8, 8.1, 8.2, and 8.3 is all about the player's actions. We're going to look at some definitions. The first one is conditions affecting the stroke. This is in the back of the book in the definitions. It's an umbrella term that includes these 5 things. And we use this little acronym CATS as kind of a handy shorthand, because when you say conditions affecting the stroke, 3 times fast, it doesn't come out too well. But when we refer to conditions affecting the stroke, when we refer to a player's CATS, we're going to be talking about these 5 things. And if you're going to be officiating, you want to commit these to memory. But I think for most of you, we've all played a lot of golf. These will make sense. It's going to be the lie of the player's ball. It's going to be the area of the intended stance, the area of the intended swing, the line of play. And lastly, and one that's often forgotten, is the relief area where the player, will drop or place a ball if they're using a relief procedure. So 3 of these are in the back in the definitions: lie, line of play, and relief area. But 2 of them, area of intended stance, this is a little bit broader definition. This is an internal definition within the definition, if you will. And it includes both where the player will place the feet and body, but also this entire area, that might affect how the player's body is positioned. That's going to be the area of intended stance.
Trying to get on, be somewhat in range for tomorrow. So you got Keegan Bradley, backward stance.
So this was Keegan Bradley at the U.S. Open at Pinehurst several years ago, and there were a lot of comments about this, about he caused an improvement. No, he went in there and he fairly took his stance. But this video is just to show that the area of intended stance was this whole area where he positioned his body. We have area of intended swing, and that includes the entire area that might affect the backswing, the downswing, the follow through. It's this entire area that the club is going to move through. Okay, that's the area of the intended swing. A real important definition, seems simple, but it's critical to applying Rule 8, and that's this definition of improve. And it has 2 key components. One is to alter. Player has to do something to alter, one of the conditions affecting the stroke or other physical conditions, and they have to gain a potential advantage. And we think of this as the improvement standard. Okay, did the player alter something? That's one thing. Did or did they not gain a potential advantage for the stroke they're going to make? So here we have a player, and she's tucking this limb behind her. She has definitely caused an improvement to the area of her intended swing. Here's Mr. Weed Whacker, as I've nicknamed him. We're going to see him a couple times. Need to do a little bit more here. Whack, whack. As a referee, if all rule situations were this clear cut, life would be good. But definitely he gained a potential advantage. He didn't gain, potentially gained an advantage and improved his area of his intended swing. We're going to look at the definition of lie. Again, this is in the back of the book. It's pretty straightforward, but a couple of things you might not have thought of. It's the spot where the ball's at rest, and it's all the stuff that might be around the ball. It's the grass that's growing around the ball. If there's balls on a cart path, that's part of the lie. If it's up against a boundary stake, that's part of the lie. Anything that's touching or right next to it, except the definition calls out that loose impediments and movable obstructions are not part of the lie. We have Rule 15. We're always allowed to move these things, and they are not considered part of the lie of the ball. Line of play, this is a good one to know because this did change slightly from 2019, and it's the line where the player intends his or her ball to go after a stroke. It's not necessarily where our ball ends up going. Very rarely does my ball go where I intend it to anymore, but it's where the player intends the ball to go. It includes an area on that line that's a reasonable distance up above the ground and on either side. So we got this little shaded area. All of that is line of play. And then the question comes up, well, does the line of play extend beyond the hole? And the answer is maybe. If the player intends the ball to go past the hole, maybe and spin back or play off of a slope, the line of play could extend beyond the hole. Just depends on what that player intends for that shot. Line of play is not necessarily a straight line between 2 points. This is a great shot of Big Mama Joanne Carner playing her patented draw. You know, it can be a curved line depending on where the player intends the ball to go. And the other thing I would say, just keep in mind that it could also be playing away from the hole. You might be in the trees and punching out backwards. It might be a dog leg where you're not necessarily playing towards the green or towards the hole. Stance, this is the specific definition of stance. It's in the back of the book. And you can see it's the position of a player's feet and body, but it does not include this other area that we have in our definition of area of intended stance. Relief area, it's the 5th of our 5 cats, if you will. And we're pretty familiar with relief areas, and Jeff's going to really go into this in detail on Thursday when he goes over Rule 14. But it's an area where a player must drop a ball when taking relief. Anytime we're using a relief rule that requires us to drop, we're going to have a relief area. And as we're going to find out, it's going to have a reference point, etc. But what's important to keep in mind for the application of Rule 8 is this whole area, this relief area, for each of these players, that's a protected area. That's one of their 5 cats, and they are not allowed to make improvements to that area. All right, back to the rule. To support the principle of play the course as you find it, this rule is going to restrict what a player may do to improve any of those conditions affecting the stroke that we just looked at, anywhere on or off the course. That's an important little phrase because your line of play, you might be, cutting a corner on a dog leg, and part of your line of play is over some out of bounds. If we didn't have that in there, a smart player would carry a little handsaw with them and they might cut a branch or two down on a tree that's out of bounds. But because the line of play is protected, all of the conditions actually are protected on and off the golf course. I'm going to go through the 5 again. It's a little bit redundant, but it's great to know these. The 5 conditions affecting the stroke are the lie of the ball at rest, the area of the player's intended stance, the area of the player's intended swing, that whole area that the club might travel through.
His practice swing, and you can see when he took the club back, he definitely took some sand back behind it. Now you can ground the club there. He not only did it once, he did it twice.
So I hope you guys could hear that audio, but this was a player that's pretty well known to all of us, Mr. Reed, and this is in the general area. This is not in a bunker. It was in a sandy waste area. And he took those 2 little practice takeaways, and he definitely improved the area of his intended swing. And I loved when the announcer said he didn't do it once, he did it twice. So that is, he's in a penalty situation there. We have the line of play that we looked at. And then that final 5th and final cats is the relief area where a player is going to drop or place a ball. Let's check this video out. Player's taking relief. He's not measuring with the driver, but that doesn't matter. He's determined his relief area. Lifted his ball. Going to take his drop. Checks out the ground. Doesn't like something that he sees. A little irregularity there and starts stepping on stuff. That is a penalty situation. That area is one of our 5 protected areas, one of our 5 cats. What you can do in your relief area, you can move loose impediments. You can tidy up and move loose impediments. I get that question sometimes. Player's going to drop in a certain area. Maybe there's some pine straw or some leaves or whatever. You can tidy that stuff up, but you can't step on stuff. You can take, if you have a movable obstruction like a cigarette butt or a candy wrapper, yeah, you can tidy that stuff out of your relief area, but you cannot step on stuff. This rule is going to apply. Rule 8 is going to apply to actions taken both during the round and while play is stopped. Most rules, the majority of the rules do not apply while play is stopped, but the ones that do will call it out within that rule, and this is one of them. So Rule 8 is still going to be in effect while play is stopped, and this kind of, I mean, this makes a lot of sense actually, because otherwise there'd be a big loophole for players. For this player, for instance, oh, play stopped. Let me break a few of these branches off and clear out a bit better area for my swing or my line of play or my stance while play is stopped. Well, you can't do that. This rule is still in effect while play is stopped. Again, just a reminder that this rule does not apply to the removal of loose impediments or movable obstructions. We can move these things anywhere on the course, and they're not part of the lie of the ball, and this rule does not apply to moving those things. That's allowed. Also, it does not apply to any action that's taken while a player's ball is in motion. Here we have a player, he's moving a divot, his ball's rolling back down the hill. He is going to be in a penalty situation. We're going to see that later this morning when we go over Rule 11, but Rule 8 does not deal with that. Rule 8 is just about what's going to happen with this shot that's coming up, not what happens when a ball's in motion. All right, we've got our 5 protected areas. Now we're going to go ahead and look at these 5, what I kind of think of as categories or classes of prohibited actions, things that you're not allowed to do. And there's going to be 5 general categories. The first is moving, bending, or breaking any groin or attached natural object. We're pretty familiar with this, but here he goes again. He's moved it, bent it, and broken it, I think, at this point. I love that sound. Referee's dream. You can't move, bend, or break any immovable obstruction, integral object, or boundary object. This is a old video of Chip Beck. Many of you might remember this, and this was before the 2019 code. We're going to see in a few minutes that he may get out of a penalty here by replacing that stake. At the time, he could not. But boundary stakes are considered to be fixed. Just pulling out a boundary stake itself is not a problem. But in this case, it improved one of his cats. It improved the area of his stance and possibly the area of his intended swing. That's a no-no. And not allowed to move a tee marker in the teeing area when playing a ball from that teeing area. Assuming that, again, keep in mind the improvement standard. If it's going to improve if this player just walked up and pulled up this tee marker to look at it, and he walked over here somewhere else in the teeing area to tee off, he actually would be okay. I would want to ask him, why did you pull up the tee marker? And, you know, it needs to be replaced. But this rule is talking about a tee marker that would be, you know, in the way of the area of intended swing, in the way of the area of intended stance. Not allowed to move those tee markers. Clarkey went over that pretty thoroughly when he went over Rule 6. All right, the second category of prohibited actions, you're not allowed to move a loose impediment or a movable obstruction into position that's going to help improve one of your cats. Here, this player's pulled a bench over so he can get up into the tree to hit his shot. That's a no-no. Another example would be maybe there's a pretty good sized branch, loose branch that's down on the ground, and you put it in position to, maybe there's a low limb ahead of you and you want to pin that limb down. So you're moving one of these things that you normally can move. We can always move loose impediments. We can always move movable obstructions. What we can't do is we can't put them in a position that's going to help us with one of our five cats. Not allowed to alter the surface of the ground. And this includes by replacing divots in a divot hole. Here we have a player. She's going to hit a little low running chip shot, takes that divot, puts it back in the hole, taps it down. That's a penalty situation. Again, can't remove divots, can't press down divots that have already been replaced, or other cut turf that's already in place. Maybe there's a little area of sod right here that's on her line of play, and she can't tap that down either. Can't create or eliminate holes, indentations, or uneven surfaces. Think of our guy that was in his relief area, taking relief from the cart path, and he started stepping on stuff. That's prohibited action, and that's a penalty situation. Can't remove or press down sand or loose soil.
Well, the thing is, there's a lot of sand there. A lot of players missed the green left, so the bunker shots have been played in the sand in the fringe grass. And Rory there has chosen the putter for the shot, and he's reached down and he's brushing the sand off the line, which is in the fringe. And unfortunately, that is against the rules of golf.
2 shots. 2-shot penalty, I'm afraid.
It was always going to be that way. That's a very big mistake, and a huge surprise that a player of his caliber would not know that rule.
There you are. I mean, it's say the logic. He's doing it on the greens, and that's fine. But I suspect he knew about it. He just wasn't in his mind at the time.
He's just given 2 away from a lack of knowledge of the rules of golf.
I tell you, these European commentators are brutal, but this is a great example. And I remember when this happened, it was fine, as the announcer properly pointed out, removing the sand or loose soil that was on the putting green, that's okay. It's the fact that he removed it back here on the fringe caused the penalty situation. And it's always going to be that way. That commentary just makes me smile every time. The 5th category of prohibited actions, we're not allowed to remove dew, frost, or water. Wouldn't it be nice if we could do this? This player just sort of mopping up the dew, creating a nice little putting track. Yep, that'd be nice if we could do that, but that is prohibited. So the penalty for breach of this rule is a general penalty. And there's our 5 categories of prohibited actions. And now we're going to go look at some exceptions. In the rules of golf, there always have to be exceptions. And the exceptions that we have are really common sense. There's some things that are going to be exceptions because they are permissions given by other rules. Specific permission always overrides the general prohibition that we saw in 8.1a. So let's look at these. There's 11 of them, but I think these will make sense. So if we're players getting ready to make a stroke, we are allowed, even though it might improve the condition, we're allowed to do these things. Fairly search. Clark went over this when he went over Rule 7. This player is searching for the ball or trying to identify it. Yep, going to bend some of that grass back, might even break something off. As long as it's a fair search, yeah, that's probably going to improve the lie or the area of intended swing a little bit. But that's okay. We're allowed to fairly search. You can always remove loose impediments, movable obstructions. Note the little phrase here, take reasonable actions. It's fine to pick up this leaf. What this player can't do is they can't drag the leaf away to try to make a nice little path behind the ball, for instance. But when we're removing these things, whether it's a leaf or a bunker rake, you are going to move some sand. Some sand is, some grains of sand are going to move. So if that does cause an improvement, that's okay. We can always mark, lift, and replace our ball. It was hard for me to picture what would be an improvement, but it's possible you could be putting your ball marker down and maybe you press down a little tuft of poana, something like that. That's okay if we're doing that in the process of marking, lifting, and replacing. We can ground the club lightly right in front of or right behind the ball. We used to call this addressing the ball. This is a little bit of a carryover from the old rules, and it's still allowed. We do have a interpretation that tells us what does it mean to ground the club lightly, because that could be, different things to different people, but it's really just allowing the weight of the club to be supported by the grass, the soil, the sand, or whatever. Just the weight of the club. Does not allow pressing the club on the ground. Got a couple videos here that are going to show some excessive pressing. Wouldn't it be nice? A little trench. Help tee the ball up. Now we're going to really go to town. Yep. That's a definite improvement. That's not supporting the weight of the club. We have a call out here, kind of just an exception to the exception, reminding us that when we're in a bunker, when a ball's in a bunker, we are not allowed to touch the sand in front of or behind the ball, and Rule 12 is in effect. So in case somebody were to read this and see this video and think, oh, okay, no, Rule 12 takes precedence. That's the bunker rule and does not allow grounding the club. We're allowed to firmly place the feet and taking a stance, and that even includes if there's, digging in. There are players in the bunker digging in to take a nice firm stance. In the process of doing that, if it's a smart player, they're kind of thinking, how hard is the sand? How deep is the sand? So even though there's a little bit of testing here, even though you're building a nice firm stance, that's allowed as long as it's reasonable. The next one, fairly taking a stance. This one is probably the one that gets a little tricky, both for a player and for a rules official or a referee, because we're going to see there's a lot of judgment involved here. A player is definitely allowed to fairly take a stance. They can take reasonable actions to get to the ball and to take the stance. However, and I've had to remind players of this a couple times, you're not entitled to a normal stance or swing, okay? And even more importantly, you must use the least intrusive course of action to deal with the situation. So you can't just go in there like a bull in a china shop. And we've got a really good video coming up that has interaction between a player and a referee, again on the European tour, that will help illustrate this more than my words.
Rules there. I just want to make sure I'm not breaking the rules. I want to walk in there to make my stance, right? I'm not allowed to touch anything. Or can I move this to make my stance? You need to get in there at least. Okay, if I put my hand in my pocket and I get it, I can do that, right? I'm not touching anything. I'm making sure. As long as you can do that here. I can take the stuff in like this. You couldn't do that. I can't do that. You can take the snakes in there without getting it back, and that's what you should do. So basically, if I want it straight like this, just make sure the ball doesn't move out there.
Well, just trying to make sure he doesn't infringe any rules. I'm surprised he doesn't know this rule, to be honest, but he's trying to do the right thing here. He doesn't want to create any kind of suspicion by anybody. It's a lot worse a shot than we thought it might be. We didn't realise it was into the fir trees. The cables are not a problem. It's all about trying to just nudge this out, get it out with one shot. He could easily leave this in. That's fantastic.
I really like this video because I love the exchange, and I hope you guys could hear it between the referee and the player. This was JM Singh, by the way. And again, the European announcers are pretty tough on the players. Oh, I can't believe he doesn't know this rule. Actually, the player knows the rule pretty well. And he had a referee right there, and he was asking all the right questions, because if you're in that situation and can I do this? And if the referee says yes, you're kind of off the hook. But the referee very correctly said, no, you've got to use the least intrusive way to get in there. And another little comment when he said, if I put my hand in my pocket, then I'm okay. And there's kind of a urban, I guess, myth or whatever, that if you have your hands in your hand in your pocket, or if you have both hands on the club, you're not going to be subject to penalty. And I will say, as a player, I knew I didn't have to have both hands on the club, but if I was trying to make my way into a shrubby tree or something, I would do that, because what you don't want to have happen is that you kind of unconsciously, not thinking, you're worried about getting to the ball, and you start pushing things out of the way with your arm when you didn't have to do that. It's one thing, you can use your hand and push a branch out of the way to get in, if that's the only way to get in. But as he said to the player, if there's another way you can do that, that's what you need to do. And there was a less intrusive way for him to get in under that tree. So that's a great exchange. I think this is, as both a player and as a referee, one of the more subjective things to try to apply out there in the field. We have some interpretations for you guys that are interested. You can look these up. It gives some examples of fairly taking a stance and not fairly taking a stance. And they're pretty much at the end of, either end of the spectrum. Believe me, there's a lot of gray area in between. And as a committee or as a referee, you've got to help sort that out sometimes. The players will think, oh, I can go in and fairly take a stance. You can, but with these limitations, you can't be a bull in a china shop. Can always make a stroke, and if you improve something making a stroke, this is kind of obvious. I like this, though, for the video that we're going to see here.
All right, back at 18, this one's teed up for Bill Haas. Not in a good way, though. Look at this thing in the bush suspended. I've hit a lot of golf shots. I never practiced one like this.
Gosh, this thing could go anywhere.
Yeah.
And if it goes right and doesn't get to the fairway, there's more of these natural areas that just aren't friendly.
Goodbye, bush.
So that, I like that. It just makes me chuckle. Bill Haas turned this growing attached thing, plant that was obviously part of the lie of his ball and all that, and he turned it into a loose impediment. Now, the second part of this, still in the same category, this is what is more likely to happen. And this is a great little video. So if you make a backswing for a stroke and you cause an improvement, that's okay as long as the stroke is then made. So the video we're going to play, I want you to keep an eye on this little kind of spindly, brushy thing that's behind his ball. So that little thing that was there is no longer there. And it was growing. It was a little scrubby something or other. And as long as he went ahead and made the stroke and, you know, finished it off, that's fine. What you don't want to do is you go back and you clip something like that and you stop to look to see what did I do. If he had stopped to look, now he's in a penalty situation. But the fact that he went ahead and completed the stroke, that's fine. Again, a reminder that when we're in bunkers, the bunker rule is going to take effect. We are not allowed to touch anything in the bunker. Even if we go on to complete the stroke, it doesn't matter. You know, this is going to be a penalty situation under the bunker rule. Okay, so it just calls that out. The next exception is in the teeing area, and Clarkie went over this last week. The teeing area, I mean, it's almost like a free-for-all. Almost anything can be done in the teeing area. So, you know, you can place a tee in or on the ground. You can step on stuff in the teeing area. You know, there's some irregularities there. You can step on them. If there's a scraggly piece of grass behind your ball, you can break it off. The teeing area is really the only place you can do that. And you can alter the surface of the ground. A nice little video here of Laura Davies and how she tees the ball up. She just gives it a couple good whacks with the driver and puts the ball on it and, you know, bombs away, Laura. So she rarely uses a tee, but she does create that nice little irregularity of surface. That's okay. And in the teeing area, you can remove sand and soil just like you can on the putting green, but you can also remove dew, frost, and water. And this is the only place on the course that you can do this. Again, I think the teeing area has more permissions than really any place, including the putting green. And this player, I mean, yeah, you can sop up this dew that's, you know, on the area of the intended swing, area of the intended stance. That's okay in the teeing area. In a bunker, this is kind of a neat exception in the bunker, kind of a little bit of a nuance, so worth looking at. In a bunker, you can smooth sand to care for the course after a ball played from the bunker is outside the bunker. We've got a little animation to show this and what this exception means. So here we have a player in the bunker, and they're going to play out backwards. This is a left-handed player. Oh, my animation didn't quite run right. I'll try that again. There it goes. Left-handed player, they decide to play out backwards away from the flag. They go out and get the rake, come back and they rake all their footprints. This is okay. Since they were in the bunker and they played a ball out of the bunker, they can do this. Had the ball started right here, had the player not been in the bunker and there were footprints here on the line of play, this player was not allowed to go in and rake. But because they were already in here and they played out, now they can rake this area. They actually could go on and tidy up the whole bunker, not just their own footprints, even though their next shot is going to have to play over this area. So that's kind of a good exception to know. On the putting green, we saw this already with Rory, but you can remove sand and loose soil on the putting green. The thing that's important, it doesn't matter where your ball is. What's important is where is the sand and loose soil. It has to be on the putting green. And we can repair damage on the putting green. Here, this player, again, where is the damage? It's on the putting green. The ball here is on the fringe, but the player is still allowed to repair damage on the putting green. So again, think of that like, doesn't matter where the ball is, where's the damage, where's the sand and loose soil. And the last one, again, this is kind of a common sense one. We can move a natural object to see if it's loose, because if it is loose, it's a loose impediment and we can move it. We have to be a little bit careful in checking it, because if it's found to still be growing or attached, it must stay attached, and you got to try to return it as nearly as possible to its original position. So you might have something twiggy, like it looks like a dead stick, and you go to move it to see if it's dead, and it's not. I mean, it might be dead, but it's still attached somehow in the ground. You can check it and move it, but then you got to try to put it back. And don't break it off, that's for sure. All right. This part, 8.1c, is new to the 2019 rules. We did not have these abilities to restore and avoid penalty before 2019. So these are, I think this is a good change. It's kind of common sense. It's pretty limited. You're not going to be able to restore most of the things that we just looked at, but we do have a couple limited cases where we can avoid penalty. So if a player's improved the conditions in one of those, notice these are numbered. This was our first category of prohibited actions, and this was our second. Moving, bending, and breaking, and moving that bench into position. So if the player's done that, they're in a penalty situation, but if before they hit their shot, make the stroke, there's not going to be a penalty if they eliminate that improvement. So to do that, they've got to restore the original conditions. We're going to see how that's allowed in a minute. But the rule just calls out and reminds us of those 5 categories of prohibited actions. The last 3, you're not going to be able to restore. If you altered the surface of the ground, like the guy stepping in the relief area, you're not going to be able to go back and try to fluff that up. Rory can't go back and try to put that sand back on the fringe that he removed. The player on the green, there's no way to, put that dew back, right? So I think of these 3 as things that happened on the ground. You did something to alter the surface of the ground or something that was on the ground. It's not practical. As a matter of fact, it's probably impossible in those cases to try to restore that. So those, you're out of luck. You cannot undo those. The bell has rung and you've gotten your penalty. All right, but for the first 2, how can we restore it? Before making the stroke, the player may avoid penalty by restoring the original object as nearly as possible. The key thing is so the improvement created has been eliminated. Here we have, we'll see here in a minute. You might be able to do it by replacing a boundary object that had been removed. This is the Chip Beck video. So he did this. Now, under today's code, 2019, he realizes the mistake. Oh, he turns around and puts it back. Kind of ironically, at the time, as I recall, he realized what he had done and he turned around and put the stake back. Well, back then, he had already incurred the penalty, so you might as well have left the stake laying on the ground. But under this rule, 8.1c, 2019 code that we have now, and this makes sense. It's a very easy thing to restore, okay? So moving that boundary object back to its original position, if he had pushed it out of the way with his hand, it would be the same thing. If he didn't remove it and he just pushed it out of the way with his hand, he could stand it back up. By returning a tree branch, grass, or anything else that you might, it's hard to imagine a immovable obstruction. That would be like maybe a directional sign or something, but we wouldn't see that one so much. The tree branch is the most common one. And here, this is the player that we saw earlier, and she tucked the branch behind. Right now, she's in a penalty situation because there was a much less intrusive way for her to get to her ball besides taking her hand and pushing that branch behind her. But if she steps away, and assuming the branch springs back, which it probably will, she can start over and she would not incur a penalty. But you can't avoid a penalty if the improvement is not eliminated. So again, this is a narrow escape clause that we have here in 8.1c. It's not going to always get you out of jail for free. If the improvement's not eliminated, like let's say the boundary stake had been broken, or let's say the branch breaks and it's hanging down and it can't be straightened up, you're still in the penalty situation. And the second part of this is you can't use anything other than the original object. Chip Beck can't walk down the line and grab another OB stake. Let's say he broke his. Can't get another OB stake and substitute that. And you can't tie like a broken branch. If it's broken and hanging, you can't tie it into place. And my favorite is that you can't use other materials to try to repair the object. You can't take your KT tape or your Gauze-Tex and try to splint the broken branch, kind of common sense there. So again, this is I think a nice change to the rules, but it's pretty narrow as far as can you actually restore things and avoid penalty. The second category is much more straightforward. If you've moved something into position, whether it's a movable obstruction or a loose impediment, you can avoid penalty just by removing the object that was moved in position. So all the player has to do here is get off the bench and pull the bench away. This one's pretty straightforward, and you would be able to restore it and avoid penalty. The last part of 8.1, 8.1D, we're going to kind of switch directions really about 180 degrees, and we're going to talk about restoring conditions that were worsened. And everything else we've looked at so far is about improving the conditions affecting the stroke, but we do have situations where our conditions get worsened after the ball came to rest, and we may or may not be able to restore those. And the interpretation that we have here just speaks to the general principle that a player is entitled to the conditions that you have when your ball comes to rest. So once my ball comes to rest, whatever the conditions are for my next stroke, the lie, the line of play, the stance, I'm entitled to have those. So let's look at when we can possibly restore. Okay, if the conditions are worsened, the caps are worsened by any person other than the player. I mean, if you worsen your own caps, you're out of luck, shame on you. By an animal or by an artificial object, without penalty, the player can restore the conditions as nearly as possible. We have 3 ways to do this. And the first one, probably the most common example I can think of is, Clarky and I are playing golf, and I've hit a shot and my ball is short, just, a few feet short of the green in the fringe. And Clarky hits after me, and he hits a nice high lofted shot, and his ball lands just in front of mine, short of the green, and spins out of the way, and it leaves a pitch mark. And his pitch mark is on my line of play, and his pitch mark is also in the fringe. It's in the general area. If it were on the green, I obviously could repair it, but it's not. It's on my line of play in the fringe. But because that pitch mark wasn't there when my ball came to rest there, I'm entitled to repair that and restore that condition. A question I've had in tournaments at all levels is a player, it's their own pitch mark in the fringe and the ball spins back. And the answer is no. Number one, you caused that worsened condition and your ball wasn't at rest yet. So you're never going to be allowed to fix your own. You're only going to be allowed to fix one that happens after your ball came to rest. Second way you're allowed to possibly restore it, if it's reasonable to do so, you can mark the ball, lift it, clean it, and replace it. And you can only do this if you have to do this. And a good example is, again, Clark and I are playing, and we come up to the green, and there's a greenside bunker. My ball's on the fringe between the bunker and the green, and Clarky's had the bad luck to be in the bunker. And he hits a nice explosion shot, and it deposits some sand on and around my ball. And in that case, this would apply, and I'm allowed to mark, lift, and clean my ball. And also, or even if there's not sand on the ball, if I need to lift the ball to clean the sand away that was deposited around the ball, we're allowed to do it in this manner. Normally, but only if you have to restore the conditions, okay? And the last one is, if the worsened conditions cannot be easily restored, you can lift and replace the ball on the nearest spot, not nearer the hole, that has the most similar conditions, is within 1 club length, and is in the same area of the course. This doesn't happen very often. I've never seen it or had it happen to me, but it could. And an example of this, because remember, when we're talking about conditions affecting the stroke, we're talking about those 5 things. It's not just the lie of the ball. When the lie of the ball gets altered, we've got 14.2D that Jeff's going to go over, and that works in conjunction with this, but this is really talking about all 5 conditions. So let's say we're playing, and Clarky and I have laid up on a par 5, and we're getting ready to hit our wedge shots, and he plays first, and he takes a nice, healthy divot, but it shatters. There's nothing to replace. And then I go to hit my shot, and my stance, my foot, the heel of my foot is in that little divot trench that he created. That would be one of the few situations where I would see this applying. I would be entitled and allowed to then move my ball so that I didn't have to stand in that divot. Okay. I don't see this one happen very often, but it's possible. But again, it's just to keep in mind that we have all 5 of those conditions affecting the stroke that can be worsened. And if it's done by someone else, an animal or an artificial object, we can try to restore it. Now, here's our reference to 14.2D. If the lie of the ball is worsened after a ball is lifted or moved and before it's replaced, that's going to be covered by 14.2D. And Jeff will go over that. Here's our exception, unless the lie was worse when play was stopped, okay, in which case this rule applies. And this, best way to explain this is just that Rule 8.1D is in effect all the time, while we're playing and while play is stopped. Rule 14.2D it kind of gets suspended. When play gets suspended, it gets suspended, if you will. And it makes sense when you think it through, because if it weren't the case, we still have 8.1D to protect us. So if something happens that any one of our 5 cats is worsened while play is stopped by, let's say, a grounds crew person, we get to restore. If we had 14.2D still in effect and our lie was worsened or improved, because 14.2D speaks to a lie that's altered, not necessarily just worsened. There could be situations where you have to restore a bad lie. And it really doesn't matter because 14.2D, it doesn't apply when play is suspended. But that's just reminding us of that. We always have 8.1D to rely on. When can we not restore worsened conditions? We've already talked about this a little bit. If the conditions are worsened by the player, you did it to yourself, you're out of luck. By a natural object, interestingly enough, or by natural forces such as wind or water, the player must not improve those worsened conditions. Exceptions, we already looked at some exceptions when we looked at earlier in 8.1, but any improvements allowed on the putting green, that's covered under the putting green rule, and we can fix a lot of things on the putting green. Our penalty statement, if we play an incorrectly substituted ball or play from the wrong place, it's going to be the general penalty, loss of hole in match play, 2 strokes and stroke play. And if we're playing in foursomes or 4-ball, we're going to see this language quite a bit. Just know that the action of the partner is treated as action by the player. I am you and you are me. And so, pick your partners wisely. Any questions on 8.1? That's the bulk of Rule 8. 8.2 and 8.3 won't take quite as much time, but any questions on 8.1? Hopefully the information is familiar. It's just the wording is different in the 2019 code. But nice to know that the Chip Beck situation, he absentmindedly pulled out the out-of-bounds stake, that can be restored and he can avoid penalty. Any questions, Matt, from anybody?
None have been submitted yet.
Okay, let's move on to 8.2. Now we're going to talk about the players. Again, it's deliberate actions, and you're going to be altering other physical conditions, not the stuff that's affecting the stroke you're going to make right now, but it might affect where your ball is going to end up at a later time. Again, it's deliberate actions, and it's altering other physical conditions to affect the ball that's at rest or the stroke to be made. And we're going to see some examples of that. Not talking about cats anymore. That's covered under 8.1. And we're not talking about anything that happens to a ball in motion. We're going to see that a little bit later this morning when we look at Rule 11. Okay. So if these are the conditions affecting the stroke for this player, we're not talking about that. All these prohibited actions that we had for the cats, they're still going to apply to these other physical conditions, these other places where your ball might end up. Again, it's where the ball might go or come to rest after the next stroke or a later stroke. Okay. And bottom one, if it moves before the stroke is made. We'll see a couple of examples here. So a player's just short of the putting green, and although his or her line of play is straight at the hole, the player is concerned that the ball might come to rest in a nearby bunker that's maybe off to the side. So before making the stroke, the player smooths sand in the bunker to make sure of a good lie if the shot to be played goes into the bunker. So that's an example of another physical condition. And this will be a penalty situation unless we're going to see the exception of caring for the course. If the player did it to care for the course, that's one thing. But if their only motivation to do this, their only intent was to make sure of a good lie in case their ball went there, now they're in a penalty situation. The second one is probably a little bit more clear cut. Player's ball is at the top of a steep hill. The player is concerned that the wind might blow the ball down the hill away from the hole before they're able to play it. So they deliberately go and press down and step down on some grass at the bottom of the hill. So if the ball comes to rest there, they'll have a better lie. That's a penalty situation under 8.2. Here's our care for the course exception. We want players to smooth footprints in the bunker. We want them to replace divots. So if you're doing stuff to care for the course, you're fine. Again, it's our general penalty. And there's our foursome and four ball statement. So 8.2 is pretty straightforward. Now the player, still me, I'm still doing something that's going to improve other things that where my ball might end up. In 8.3, this kind of wraps up 8.1 and 8.2. It's still my actions, the player. I'm still taking deliberate actions, but now I'm altering Clarky's physical conditions, whether it's his cats or his other physical conditions where his ball might end up. I'm doing it to affect another player's ball. Okay, so we're kind of wrapping 8.1 and 8.2 up, but now it applies to things that I'm doing for another player. You can see it's another player's cats or another player's other conditions, all these other things on the course. Again, it's deliberate actions, and it's affecting another player for a ball that's at rest or a stroke that's going to be made by that other player. Again, does not have to do with stopping a ball in motion. That's going to be covered under Rule 11, or putting things in the way, covered under Rule 11. Anything for a ball in motion is covered by 11. Okay, must not deliberately take any of the actions that we looked at in Rule 8.1. So now, even though these are still prohibited actions, and this is interesting to note, to either improve or worsen the conditions affecting the stroke of another player. So, I'm not necessarily being miscongeniality and helping Clarky out by improving something for him. I might be, the bad guy and worsening something, and the rules are not going to allow this. That makes sense. Anyway, where that player's ball at rest might go or come to rest after that player's next stroke or a later stroke. Same thing that applied to me that I can't do for myself, I can't do for Clarky or another player. Again, there's this exception to care for the course. No penalty if the player alters anything to care for the course. We want those divots replaced. We want those bunkers raked. This is going to be a general penalty. There's an interesting interpretation here that if, typically if I do this, to Clarky, one of his cats or one of his other conditions, I'm going to get the penalty. But if a player asks, authorizes, or allows another player to deliberately alter stuff to improve his or her play, the player acting on the request, which would be me, would get the general penalty, and the player who requests it, which would be Clarky, would also get a general penalty. So if I'm trying to be, miscongeniality, and Clarky sees me doing that, and he thinks, oh, that Alice, she's a nice person, I'm just going to let her go ahead and do that. We are both going to be in a penalty situation. And again, this is just the rules. We want the whole principle is we're supposed to play the course as we find it. We're not supposed to improve things. You definitely can't worsen things for the other player or the opponent. So this all kind of ties together and makes sense. Again, our foursomes and four ball statement. Partners treated, action by the partner, treated as action by the player. 8.3. Okay, that's Rule 8. I'll give you guys a minute if you have any questions or you want to refill your coffee, and we'll move on to Rule 9. Are we good to go, Matt?
Yes, we are.
All right. Okay, on to Rule 9. This goes hand in hand with Rule 8. Play the course as you find it, play the ball as it lies. And Rule 9, a big part of Rule 9 has to do with a ball at rest that's been moved. But the overriding principle in the first part of it is all about playing the ball as it lies. Looks like a big rule, and it is in a way, but we're going to see it sorts itself out pretty quickly. We're going to have some really important definitions, especially this known or virtually certain standard that we use. First part is just like the name of the rule says, play the ball as it lies, great underlying principle. And then the rest of the rule, the bulk of the rule, is for a ball that might have been moved. Deciding, did the ball move? And if it did, what caused it to move? And we kind of have this little decision tree that we go down to decide how to apply the rule. Is there a penalty or not? Do we replace the ball or not? In most cases, we do replace the ball. And the very last part is about a ball marker. And as we'll see, that gets treated the same. Here's our same picture, because this goes hand in hand. The two, if anybody's ever read Tufts' book, The Principles of Golf, I can't remember what the exact title is, little blue book. The two great underlying principles are you play the course as you find it, and you play the ball as it lies. And that's what Rules 8 and 9 speak to. Here's our purpose statement. If the player's ball comes to rest and is then moved by natural forces, such as wind or water, the player normally plays it from its new spot. We know there's an exception on the putting green for a ball that's been marked, lifted, and replaced. But otherwise, at any other time, if it's moved by natural forces, it's just in play. Mother Nature did it, play it from the new spot. But if a ball at rest is lifted or moved by anyone or any outside influence before the stroke is made, the ball must be replaced on its original spot. So any other type of movement other than natural forces, we're going to be replacing the ball. And just a reminder, kind of a public service announcement, that players should be careful when they're near any ball at rest, because if you cause your own ball to move or an opponent's ball to move, there's normally going to be a penalty. And we do have those exceptions of when we're searching and whatnot that we'll look at. But for the most part, you want to be careful because you could be in a penalty situation. On the putting green and the teen area, especially on the putting green, we have this new to 2019 where any accidental movement on the putting green, no penalty, and you just replace the ball. So, all right, must be played as it lies. 9.1a. Except when the rules require or allow the player to play from another place. Sounds great to say, yep, I'm going to start my ball from the tee, I'm going to find it, hit it again, play it as it lies, but things happen. And quite often, not in the play of every hole until you get to the green, but quite often, we do have to move our ball and pick it up and do something with it. So if the rules require or allow us to play from another place on the course, here we have a player that's taken relief from a penalty area, to lift that ball and replace it on its original spot. Here, this player's ball was moved. It's on the putting green. Needs to lift it in order to replace it. That's kind of common sense. And we do have this strange little exception. We're going to see this video again, but this, of all you out there, I'm sure you've seen it or heard of it from somebody, but this is a very rare thing. If the ball moves during the backswing or a stroke, well, we're going to look at the definition of moved first. This goes against Wikipedia, okay? Rules of Golf trumps Wikipedia when it comes to the definition of what does moved mean. It has to leave its original spot and come to rest somewhere else, okay? And it has to be seen by the naked eye. We're using the naked eye standard here, so it just doesn't matter that the high def, ultra zoom TV camera sees it. If the player can't see it with their naked eye and other people can't see it, then it's not considered to have moved. Also, this tells us that it's a 3D. There's 3 dimensions here. The ball can move up, down, horizontally. I've never seen one move up, but have quite often seen it go down, sink down into the grass or whatever. Anything that's away from its original spot. And if it moves and comes back to that spot, or it just kind of wobbles around, but it stays on the spot, the ball's not moved. We often call this oscillating. And that is different than moving. Again, we're not looking at Wikipedia. We're looking in the definitions in the back of the rules of golf. Okay, with that in mind, if a player's ball at rest begins moving after the player has begun the stroke or a backswing for the stroke, and they go on to make the stroke, the ball moves, goes ahead and hits his putt. Now we're not going to replace the ball. This is one of the rare instances where you don't replace the ball. No matter what caused it to move, you just play it from where it comes to rest. This player's on the putting green, so there's no penalty, even if the player caused that movement, which I would say they probably didn't. It looks like maybe gravity caused it. You just go ahead and play the ball from where it came to rest after the stroke. Very rare circumstance. And again, if the player caused it to move, we're going to see that when we get to 9.4, although in this case it was on the putting green, so there would be no penalty. Here's our penalty statement. If you play an incorrectly substituted ball or play a ball from the wrong place, you're going to get the general penalty. My ball, gets moved and I substitute another ball when I, instead of replacing the original ball, or I put it back in the wrong place, or I don't replace it. That's more likely to happen, but you get the general penalty. Here's our multiple breaches statement. And this is just telling us that if we do 1.3C4 gets referenced a lot, and it has to do with, I call it the volume discount rule. If you do multiple things wrong and they're all related, you get a big discount sometimes. In match play, it doesn't matter because once you get the general penalty, you're going to the next hole. But in stroke play, if you substitute a ball when you're not allowed to and you play it from the wrong place, instead of getting 2 + 2 to equal 4, you're just going to get that, you're just going to roll up into that 1 2-stroke general penalty. And as we're going to see when we get to the Rule 14 with Jeff, all the 1-stroke procedural penalties that can happen in Rule 14, those also get combined together for a discount. All right. That's the first part of Rule 9. It's in the title, but it's a short little piece of it, and it's all about just playing ball as it lies. Missed our definition for known or virtually certain. Okay, I guess we're going to see it here. All right, 9.2, now we're going into our decision tree. We're going to decide whether the ball moved, and if it didn't, that's great. We just go on and keep playing. But if we do decide that it's moved, we got to decide then the next decision is what caused it to move. So if a player's ball at rest is treated as having moved only if it's known or virtually certain that it did. Okay, that's pretty certain right there. The player could feel that, others could see that. Here's our definition. This is a good one to know because it's going to apply a lot in this rule. We use it a lot in Rule 8, and we also use it when we talk about penalty areas, and there's a couple other places throughout the rules. But it's a standard. It's a standard for deciding what happened to a player's ball. First example here is penalty area. We'll see this when we get to Rule 17. Did the ball come to rest in the penalty area or not? Did the ball move? Bloop. Yep, that ball moved. And if it did, what caused it to move? Okay. It means more than just possible or probable. Either there's conclusive evidence. I think of this as eyewitness evidence, conclusive evidence that the event in question happened. Okay. Or there's a 95% likelihood. There could be a small degree of doubt, but if you have gathered all reasonably available information and that still shows that it's at least 95% likely that the event in question happened, then it happened. Here's our little internal definition. Within the definition of all reasonably available information, it includes not only what I know as a player, it's all other information that I can get with reasonable effort and without unreasonable delay. I had a situation one time, I was playing up in Portland, and my pre-shot routine was to stand behind the ball. I'd visualize the shot, and then a couple yards behind the ball, I would turn and I'd take a little practice swing. And I had this little wedge shot, and I took my little practice swing, and I took a little divot about the size of a silver dollar, and it hit my ball. And I just caught it kind of out of the corner of my eye, and my impression was I think it moved my ball, but I wasn't really sure. So I asked my caddy. Well, he was, writing notes in his yardage book, so he didn't see it. And even though I was in the fairway, the gallery ropes were pretty close behind me. It was a tight course. And so I turned to the people behind me. I said, "Did that ball move?" And the guy goes, "Yep." Well, needless to say, I changed my pre-shot routine after that day, but I had to gather all reasonably available information to make a determination. Okay, if the ball might have moved, but it's not known or virtually certain, it is treated as not having moved, and it's just played as it lies, and you go on. We don't need the rest of Rule 9. Everybody see that? Player walks up, accidentally nudges the ball, and it rolls back. Did it move? Well, to my eye, if I were standing there watching this guy putt, I would say, no, it did not move. I'm pretty certain it didn't. If you had a real high-def camera, you might see that it was off by a fraction, but for me, if I were making that call, I would say that ball has not moved. It came back to its original spot. Remember, we're not using Wikipedia. We're using the rules of golf definition. All right, here's some examples. The interpretations are very helpful for giving examples of things to try to bring this stuff to life a little bit more. Okay, here's an example of when a player, it is known or virtually certain that a ball is moved. The player marks, lifts, replaces. As that player walks away, the ball rolls a short distance, okay, comes to rest. The player doesn't see it. So just because the player doesn't see it doesn't mean it didn't happen. But another player observes it and informs the player. And so now that it's known, eyewitness testimony, it's known the ball moved, the player must replace the ball on its original spot. Second example, still got two players playing together. They hit approach shots to an elevated green. So they couldn't see where the balls came to rest. And unknown to them, player's B ball struck player's A ball that was already at rest on the green, and it rolled some distance further from the hole. As long as this information does not come to the attention of the players before player A makes the next stroke, player A does not get a penalty for playing from where his or her ball came to rest. If they did have that information, player A had to replace their ball, because playing from where it came to rest is playing from a wrong place. But they didn't have that information. So the known or virtually certain standard, it's what did you know at the moment? What did you know when you made that stroke? Okay, here we have a ball that's moved. Now we need to decide what caused it to move. You know, the other guy with the putter, he got to keep playing, but now we need to dig deeper into Rule 9. Because this is going to determine, knowing what caused it to move is going to determine if the player must replace the ball or not, and if there's going to be a penalty. Now, the rules only recognize 4 possible causes, so we have a pretty straightforward way of eliminating these things. Natural forces, and we're going to look at that first. Anyway, natural forces such as wind, water, gravity. Second possible cause can be the player, and that includes the player's caddy. And if it's match play, the opponent in match play, and that includes the opponent's caddy. And the final one is an outside influence, which includes any other player in stroke play. If you're not playing match play, you've only got 3 things here in your decision tree. But if you're playing match play, you have 4. Natural forces, here's our definition. Effects of nature such as wind, water, or if something happens for no apparent reason, we're going to give gravity the nod. We're going to say it was the effects of gravity. And I've seen gravity at work enough times to know that it is, sometimes it's our friend, sometimes it's not. Force and foreball, just reminding us that action that the partner takes is treated as action by the player. We're going to see this all through Rule 9. I think we see it in Rule 11 too. All right, we're going to use our known or virtually certain standard for deciding what caused the ball to move. So the player, opponent, or an outside influence is treated as having caused the ball to move only if it's known or virtually certain to be the cause. So here it's player, she's chatting away, she boots her ball. We know that she did it. The opponent, careless, kicks the player's ball. Seagull, outside influence, moves the ball. So we have to have that 95%, either that eyewitness stand knowledge or virtual certainty eyewitness or 95% likelihood. So if it's not known or virtually certain that one of those 3 was the cause, the ball's treated as having been moved by natural forces. Natural forces is going to get the credit. Let's check out this video. I think this is Padraig Harrington. He's getting ready to putt. This is at the Masters. It's a windy day. You can see his pants flapping in the wind. He backs off once, comes back in, hasn't done anything near his ball. His putter is several inches away from the ball, and the ball starts to roll. It's on a slope, and it's windy, and the wind's blowing that direction. Natural forces gets the nod. Because he had marked and replaced his ball, the ball owns the spot, and in this case, he would replace the ball. All right. Again, this comes right out of the definition. In applying this standard, all reasonably available information must be considered. Not just what the player knows, but also what kind of information can the player get with reasonable effort and without unreasonably delaying play. We do not expect the player to ask them to call the TV trailer and, see did the ball move or not. No, that's unreasonable effort, and it's also going to delay play. That's not the expectation for this. Here we have a little quiz question that kind of help illustrate some of this, hopefully, and maybe clear up some things. Which one of the following is false? We're looking for the false statement. Okay, a player has caused a ball to move only if it's known or virtually certain that the ball moved, and it is known or virtually certain the player caused it to move. That's a true statement. If it is known or virtually certain that a ball at rest moved, but it's unclear what caused it to move, the rules treat natural forces as cause of the ball's movement. Yep, we saw that. That's a true statement. When it is known or virtually certain a ball at rest has been moved, it must always be replaced on the spot from which it moved, which if not known must be estimated. At first glance, that sounds like a true statement, but when you're reading these questions, if you take the exam or you just do the quiz questions online to help your knowledge, anytime they say always, I get a little red flag, because we just looked at natural forces. You don't usually replace the ball for natural forces. So I believe that's the false statement. And then the last one, the rules recognize only 4 possible causes. That's a true statement. So yep, it's C. Had they said almost always, C would have also been a true statement. Okay, that's rule 9.2. We've decided whether the ball moved, and we've decided what caused it to move. Now, the next 4 parts of this rule, 9.3, 9.4, 5, and 6, are going to take each of these individual causes of movement and tell us, do we replace the ball or not? Is there a penalty situation or not? So this is the next, we've made our decision. The ball's moved. We've decided what's caused it to move. Now we can skip to these different spots in the rule. All right, natural forces. If natural forces cause the ball at rest to move, there's no penalty, and the ball must be played from its new spot. This is a little rivulet. Could be in a penalty area. Could be, wherever. And natural forces cause the movement. Just play on. We have our putting green exception, that a ball on a putting green must be replaced if it moves after having been lifted and replaced. This is from the 2016 Masters. I think quite a few of you will remember this. And this 2019 code was not in effect at the time. What happened to Billy Horschel, I think, helped expedite this change to the rules. Let's take a look. Oh, I guess we're going to see that later. No, here it is.
Back up using a lower lofted.
Hello, Raymond Floyd.
This looks heavy too. Just a little quick there, but he's compiling one of the better rounds of the day.
Notice the wind.
Running up to mark that before it falls off the false front.
The wind's going that direction. So if a gust of wind were to come up, it could literally blow that ball. And you can see the ripples on the water as the gust hits it.
Uh-oh.
And this is such a helpless feeling. My goodness.
I don't know how many of you remember that, but at the time in 2016, his ball was in play there, and because natural forces moved it, the ball was in play in the penalty area. So this, like I said, was one of the instances that helped expedite this rules change. And now, if your ball's on the putting green and you've marked it, lifted it, and replaced it, the ball owns that spot. So no matter what causes it to move, you're always going to replace it. And the little nuance there, and we're not going to get into Rule 13 in this series of webinars, but the nuance there is you have to mark it and replace it each time. So if you put up and you marked it, replaced it, and it moves, okay, now you putt again and your ball's up near the hole. If you haven't marked it, lifted it, and replaced it, it doesn't own the spot. And so in the absence of lifting and replacing it, the natural forces, it is in play. So that's just something to know if you're for your own play. But it was unfortunate when that happened. That was a great change to the rules. That's the only time that situation on the putting green when a ball moved by natural forces gets replaced. Here's our penalty statement. Ball moved by natural forces. All right, now we're going to move to 9.4, ball moved or lifted or moved by the player. This is the one that, as players, we're most concerned about is, what do we do and is there a penalty or not? Again, it's only going to apply when it's known and virtually certain that a player, including the player's caddy, lifted the ball at rest or caused it to move. And if the player does that, the ball must be replaced on its original spot. Okay, always going to replace it. With these exceptions, these are our common sense exceptions. If you're lifting the ball to take relief under a rule, or if you have to replace it on a different spot because maybe it didn't come to rest on that spot. 14.2D is about the lie of the ball being altered. 14.2E is about the ball won't come to rest on the spot. And Jeff will cover those on Thursday. So common sense exception here. Here's our guy that makes the stroke while the ball's, moving. He's not going to replace it. That's exception number 2. And if the player lifts or deliberately touches his or her ball at rest or causes it to move, they're going to get 1 penalty stroke. You see on the right, the player, they're rotating the ball to identify it so they can see their identifying mark. Well, they're entitled to do that, but they had to mark the ball first. Jeff's going to go over that on Thursday. Rotating is considered lifting in the rules, and they cause that ball to move, so they're going to get a penalty stroke for that. And we do have some exceptions. These will be familiar to you. Go through these. If the player's allowed to lift or move the ball, obviously there's no penalty, you know. Or if you're required to replace a moved ball on its spot, you have to lift it to replace it.
Oh, look at that, the iguana trying to eat his ball at 16. Come on, push it back to the hole.
So, you know, we require the player to replace that ball. He obviously has to lift it to do so. And the rule requires or allows the player to drop or place again or play from a different place. Those are all examples of that. Second one, we're familiar with this from Rule 7. Any accidental movement before the ball is found, there's no penalty to the player. Okay. They do replace the ball, but there's no penalty. Accidental movement on the putting green, never any penalty here either. That's a great change in 2019 code. Clumsy, careless, absent-minded, whatever reason, accidental movement on the putting green, no matter how it happens, no penalty. You do replace the ball. Anywhere except on the putting green when applying a rule. Normally anywhere except on the putting green, you get, you know, clumsy, careless, or whatever, you're going to have a penalty. But if you're applying a rule, there's, you know, and you cause your ball to move, there's no penalty as long as you're taking reasonable actions to mark the ball, lift it, replace it. Maybe you're moving a penalty area stake, or maybe, you know, a bunker rake next to your ball. Obviously, that's accidental movement while you're applying a rule. Restoring a worsened condition, ball accidentally moves, that's okay. Again, you're applying a rule. If you're taking relief under a rule and you're trying to determine whether relief is even available, maybe player wants to swing their club to see if there's going to be interference from a sprinkler head or something like that, and the ball, you know, get a little careless and the ball moves, as long as you were doing it to determine if you're allowed to have relief. Or if you're trying to determine where to take relief, maybe you're trying to figure out where your nearest point of complete relief is, and you're making some little practice swings or whatever, or stances, and you know, something happens and the ball moves and you cause it to move. There's no penalty because you are operating under a rule. Or if you're measuring under a rule, trying to decide the order of play, maybe trying to decide, you know, where is my 2 club length lateral relief option going to get me for a ball that's unplayable. And here's our penalty statement. Again, multiple breaches. This is a little bit different take on the 1.3C4. In stroke play, in this part of that talks about combining procedural and substitution wrong place breaches. And we're going to see throughout the rules, if you have a procedural breach, and believe me, I keep a list of those little one-shot ticky-tacky procedural breaches, they always get rolled up with playing from a wrong place or incorrect substitution. But that doesn't really speak to moving your ball. Moving, you know, if I accidentally move my ball because I get careless out in the fairway and I boot it, you know, that's not a procedural breach. It's a one-stroke penalty, but it's not procedural. So what this is telling us, we have a clarification. It is saying that in this case, 9.4, playing from a wrong place is related to causing the ball to move, first of all. Okay. Just going to get the general penalty for playing from a wrong place. The act of moving the ball in breach of 9.4 is related to playing from a wrong place in breach of 14.7. So even though it's not a procedural penalty, this clarification, it falls under 1.3C4, and it is, you are allowed to have the volume discount, if you will. So, because what happens sometimes, a player, they move their ball and then they're not sure if they're supposed to replace it or not, so they play it from the new location. Well, they went from having a one-stroke penalty to now having the general penalty. And this is just saying that if you're in stroke play, you just get the 1 + 2 = 2. Nice clarification. Little quiz question here, okay? In all of the following cases, the player caused her ball to move and replaced it back on the original spot. In which is the player penalized? This is a good little review of what we just went over. The player stepped on her ball in the rough while searching for it. Searching, that's okay. Rule 7. The player's ball moved as she was measuring 2 club lengths to see if that would get her out of a bush. And then she decided not to take relief. Well, she was measuring to see where the relief would put her, so I think that's probably okay, even if she changed her mind. Matter of fact, I know it is because I had this happen to a player on tour one time that I got called to a ruling. The player accidentally hits her ball in the fairway with a practice swing. No, there's a penalty situation right there, but we'll check the last one too. Player accidentally hits her ball on the putting green with a practice swing. 2 different situations. Clumsiness, carelessness. On the putting green, no penalty. Everywhere else, you're in a penalty situation. So the answer is C. All right. Guys, think of any questions, just get them to Matt. Otherwise, I'm going to keep moving along because we've got more to cover, and I'm trying to stay in my time frame here. All right. Now, what about a ball that's been lifted or moved by an opponent in match play? And look at that. Again, only when it's known or virtually certain that the opponent, including the opponent's caddy, lifted a player's ball at rest or caused it to move. Here we have a picture of this. This is my opponent in match play, and they walked up there and they're marking my ball. If the opponent plays the player's ball as a wrong ball, that was going to be covered in Rule 6, not covered here. But in match play, the players lost the hole, so they just go to the next tee. I'll give you the short answer to that. If the opponent lifts or moves the player's ball at rest, the ball's going to be replaced. Again, we're almost always going to replace a ball. If you don't know the spot, you're going to estimate it. It's going to be replacing it on a spot. Jeff's going to go over that in some detail on Thursday. And here's our 2 common sense exceptions. If the opponent's conceding the next stroke, a hole, or a match, obviously you're not going to replace. Or if the opponent lifts or moves the ball at the player's request. Maybe the player intends to apply a rule or take relief, and this player has a bad back, and she asks the opponent to, please mark and lift my ball. Common sense. But normally, if the opponent lifts or deliberately touches the player's ball at rest or causes it to move, they are going to get 1 penalty stroke. You're supposed to stay away from your opponent's ball. Our exceptions are a couple that we've already looked at, and we'll just go over these quickly. Again, common sense. No penalty when the opponent lifts the ball when conceding a stroke, hole, match, whatever. Get to lift the ball. Or if you do it, the opponent does it at the player's request. Okay, we looked at that. And our exception on the putting green, no penalty if the opponent marks the spot of the player's ball and lifts it on the putting green, thinking it was their ball. That was that other picture I showed you. So again, this would be, it's on the putting green. It falls right in line with any kind of accidental movement on the putting green. Everybody's off the hook on the putting green. And then we have the same exceptions that we had for the player. If the accidental movement happens during search before the ball is found, if it happens any accidental movement on the putting green, or any accidental movement anywhere except the putting green while you're applying a rule. Those same exceptions that we had for the player in 9.4 apply to the opponent in 9.5. For the most part, in match play, the opponent, you don't want them touching your ball, or nor should you touch theirs or mess with it. But we do want them to help search, and we do, have certain provisions, but there is a little bit more restriction in match play than stroke play. Okay. Now go to outside influence. Let's look at the definition first. It's any of these people or things that can affect what happens to a player's ball or equipment or to the course. It's any person, including another player. There we have the player. All these other people are outside influences, except the player, the caddy, player's partner, and their caddy, or if it's match play, the opponent and their caddies. So other than these people right here, every other person in the world is an outside influence, okay? It can be an animal, any animal. I love this old black and white photo. I think this was Johnny Bulla at one of the U.S. Opens back in maybe the 30s, back when they allowed dogs on the golf course. Just kidding, USGA. Any natural object, artificial object, or anything else, including another ball in motion. And the one to kind of point out here is artificial object. That includes the player's equipment. That's a little bit of a change, I think, from the old code. But that's an important change to know that a player's equipment is an outside influence. Again, not natural forces. It just is reinforcing that the definition of natural forces, effects of wind, water, gravity, that is separate definition. That's a separate cause that we've already looked at. It is not part of an outside influence. Players can get confused on that. Okay, again, here's our knowledge or virtual certainty standard, that an outside influence, including another player in stroke play or another ball, lifted or moved the player's ball. There's no penalty and the ball is replaced on its original spot. And this applies whether or not the player's ball has been found. So if the information that the ball was in fact moved by an outside influence only becomes known to the player after the ball has been played, the player did not play from a wrong place because the knowledge did not exist when the player made the stroke. We've kind of talked about this principle a little bit, and it's just reinforced here with this interpretation. It's what knowledge did the player have when they made the stroke? If it's not known or virtually certain that the ball was lifted or moved by an outside influence and the ball is lost, it's not found within that 3-minute search time, the player's only option is to proceed under Rule 18.2 and take stroke and distance relief. We will cover that rule next week. And again, if the player's ball is played as a wrong ball, that's covered by Rule 6, not by this rule. Is there a penalty statement? Should be pretty familiar by now. All right, ball lifted or moved by outside influence. Which of the following is false? In stroke play, if a player accidentally, looking for a false statement. Stroke play, if a player accidentally kicks and moves another player's ball, there's no penalty to either player and the ball must be replaced. That's true because it's stroke play. If the wind blows a player's bag over and it moves his ball, the player is penalized 1 stroke and must replace the ball. Yeah, at first that looks like that could be true, but we just went over the fact that a player's bag equipment is an outside influence. So I think that's a false statement. If the knowledge of the player's ball in play was moved by a spectator becomes known to the player only after he played his ball, the player did not play from a wrong place. That's true. We just saw that with that interpretation. A player hits his tee shot in the middle of the fairway, cannot find it. If before the 3-minute search time has ended, he has knowledge or virtual certainty that his ball was moved by an outside influence, the player, without penalty, may estimate the ball's original spot and replace. Yes, that is true. He has knowledge or virtual certainty. So B is the false statement. A little confusing because it's the player's bag and the wind blew the bag. And we know that, they write these questions with all this extra information that kind of gets your mind going a bunch of different ways. So wind, that's part of the natural forces group. Player's bag, that's part of the player's equipment. But we just saw by definition of outside influence that a player's equipment is part of the outside influence bucket. All right. If you guys have questions, even if I've moved on, just put them into Matt and we'll try to answer them. Last part of this rule is ball marker lifted or moved. Again, if it's moved in any way, whether it's natural forces, any one of those 4 causes, the ball marker or the ball is going to be replaced. So the ball marker's been moved. And this is a ball marker, obviously, it's in place to mark the spot of the ball. The player they have the option. They don't have to replace the ball marker. They can directly put the ball back down on the spot, or they can put the ball marker down and then replace their ball. They have their choice. Either one is fine. What's the penalty for lifting a ball marker or causing it to move? If the player or his or her opponent in match play lifts the player's ball marker or causes it to move, when the ball is lifted, not yet replaced, okay, the player or opponent's going to get 1 penalty stroke. And we've got an interesting video to watch here. It's I think this is Jason Scribner at the Vic Open a couple of years ago. Let's see what he does.
Let's try and work out what's happened here, Ali.
Then he's picked the marker up and walked away with it in his pocket.
Uh-oh.
Am I correct? He's holding it now, I think.
So, God bless him. Players, we kind of go brain dead sometimes. And so he was spanning the marker, he had put his marker down and it was in somebody else's way and he was spanning it over to get it out of the way. And instead of putting it on the ground, he just picked it up and walked away. He just kind of had a, little brain freeze there. And that is a 1-stroke penalty. So anyway, But in all cases where the player or opponent gets no penalty for lifting the ball or causing it to move, there's also no penalty for lifting or accidentally moving the ball marker. So if the ball marker was on the green and, player taps it down with the putter and it sticks to the bottom of the putter, that would be an accidental movement. So in all the cases, it gets treated like the ball in terms of deciding if there's a penalty or not. All right. Here's our penalty statement. Rule 9.7. Any questions? The big thing is that when the ball moves, you're going to have that decision tree. You're going to decide, did it actually move? Using that knowledge or virtual certainty standard of 95%, either eyewitness or 95% likelihood that it did. And then you're going to, if the answer is yes, it did move, then you have to decide what caused it to move. And you're still going to use that known or virtual certainty standard to decide that. And that'll tell you how to proceed. In all cases, almost all cases, you're going to replace the ball unless it was moved by natural forces. And even natural forces, if it happened on the putting green after the ball was replaced, you'll replace the ball. All right. Fresh in your coffee, we're on to Rule 11. Rule 11. So we talked, the rules that we just saw kind of referred to Rule 11 a couple of times. And Rule 11 is only dealing with ball that's in motion. And so if something happens to a ball at rest, we have other rules to go with. And but Rule 11 is all about our ball in motion. It's a fairly short rule, but it has some pretty complex nuances. And it's one of the rules that I always feel like I need to study and refresh myself before I'm going to go take the exam. Fairly short, purpose statement, introduction. And the first part, 11.1, we're dealing with accidents happen, accidental movement. And then the next two parts deal with deliberate actions. And the 11.2 is going to be deliberately moving something, either deliberately deflecting or moving something into a position that's going to deflect. And 11.3 is a little bit different. It's deliberately moving things out of the way or altering conditions where a ball might end up. And it's a little bit almost stricter than 11.2 in some ways. Okay, let's take a look. Purpose statement is going to cover, this rule is going to cover what to do if a ball in motion hits a person, animal, equipment, or anything else on the course. Notice it says a person. That could be any person. When this happens accidentally, there's no penalty, and the player normally just accepts the results, good or bad, and you play the ball from where it comes to rest, accidental deflection. The rule is also going to restrict a player from taking deliberate actions to affect where any ball in motion might come to rest. We'll see that in the second part. All right. Here's our introduction. Everybody see that little deflection? This rule applies anytime a ball in motion, a ball in play is in motion, whether after a stroke, in this case that was after a stroke, or otherwise. So if you read this rule and you kind of thought, well, what is or otherwise? We have a good example here that was unfortunate for Rickie Fowler. Let's take a look.
Raj, it appears that Fowler has dropped the ball twice and the ball's gone back into the penalty area.
That's correct, Gary. So now placing the ball where the ball struck the course on the second drop.
He's in a tough spot here.
You could really have issues.
I mean, with a good shot from this location, the grass is how steep the bank is. Rickie's looking. That's crazy. How that ball snapped there.
I apologize for the audio there. I don't know. It's normally a little bit clearer than that. But Rickie had taken his relief. He, dropped twice and then placed the ball. The ball had come to rest. It was in play, and he went over to check with his caddy and walk up to the green, and the ball subsequently moved. So when the rule says that little phrase, or otherwise, so it's either going to be a ball that's in motion from a stroke or a ball that's in motion in a situation like this. The moral of this story as a player is if you're on one of those slippery slopes, do not delay before playing your shot, because I've had this happen, not to myself, but I had this happen when I was officiating on the LPGA Tour. I've seen it happen at regional events. It's not fun to give that ruling to the player. All right. Rule 11 does not apply if you're dropped in a relief area and the ball hasn't come to rest and there's a deflection. That's going to be covered in 14.3. Jeff's going to go over that. We have separate procedure for what happens to a deflected ball that's been dropped in a relief area. Okay. There's never going to be a penalty to the player. I love this change. This probably was my favorite change in 2019, to have no penalty to the player if for an accidental deflection. I think I had 3 different times during my tour career where I got a little too greedy trying to punch out of trees. I think one time I was trying to blast a shot through a bush, and the ball came back and it hit me, or one time it hit my bag, even though the caddy had put the bag well out of the way. And in all those cases, it was a penalty situation. It used to be 2, then it went to 1, and now there's no penalty for accidental deflections. And I think that's a great change based on my experience. Trust me, the ball never ended up in a better spot. And then we only have 2 exceptions about when the ball is not played as it lies. Oh, but back to the penalty, we did keep, and we're going to see this, we did keep that exception in stroke play for a ball on the putting green, hitting another ball. Okay, accidentally hits any person or outside influence, no penalty to any player. This is true even if the ball hits the player, opponent, or any other player or any of their caddies. Or if it hits any of their equipment. Like my ball hitting my clubs, that was not good then, but that's okay now. Here's our exception on the putting green. We still have a penalty situation on the putting green in stroke play. If the player's ball in motion hits another ball at rest on the putting green, both balls were on the putting green, the player's going to get the general penalty. So this carries over from the old code, and this makes sense. You can always ask that player to mark that ball. So to me, that's your own darn fault, and it's a big penalty. It's a general penalty, 2 strokes in stroke play. It does not apply in match play. That would be okay in match play for that to happen. Okay, if the player's ball in motion accidentally hits any person or outside influence, the ball is going to be played as it lies, with 2 exceptions. And we have a situation where a ball that's not played from the putting green, a ball that's played from the putting green. And this first exception makes a lot of sense. Okay, when the ball played from anywhere on the course except the putting green comes to rest on any person, animal, or moving outside influence. So, yep, on the left, the ball's in the spectator pocket. That actually happened. And the middle picture, my shot from out in the fairway has rolled up and it's rolling across the putting green, and this dog runs across and grabs it. Or a ball ends up in the back of the maintenance cart as the guy is driving by. So that's what this exception is referring to. Well, obviously we cannot play it as it lies in those cases. It's not practical, it's not possible. So you're not going to play the ball as it lies. Instead, you're going to take this free relief procedure. You're going to decide whether, if the ball's anywhere except the putting green, it's going to be a dropping procedure, and on the putting green it's going to be place. All right. Anywhere except on the putting green, the player is going to drop any ball. It can be the original ball or another ball. Whenever we're taking relief, whether it's pen relief or free relief, we're always allowed to substitute a ball. Always. Anyway, the reference point is going to be the spot right under that guy's pocket, where the ball is in his pocket. It's going to be the spot on the ground under his pocket is going to be your reference point. Now, if he had walked around a little bit, it's where did it first come to rest in his pocket. Usually spectators are so scared, they just freeze when something happens. The ball rolls near their foot or anything, they just freeze in place. But so it's the spot right on the ground under that where it first came to rest. It's going to be a 1 club length relief area, and it's going to be in the same area of the course. In this case, it's the general area. Same area of the course as the reference point and not near the hole. Pretty familiar language there. Now, when the ball's on the putting green, this is for a shot that was played from off the putting green and the ball's rolling across the putting green. The dog picks it up and grabs it. Now the player's going to place the ball. Again, it can be any ball, substitutions allowed, on the estimated spot right under where the ball first came to rest in the dog's mouth, in this case, okay? And you're going to use the procedures for replacing under 14.2. And Jeff's going to go over these procedures, but basically, replacing the ball, you've got to set it down with your hand and let it go on that spot. And then if the lie's been altered, we have something to deal with that. 14.2e, I think, is where the ball doesn't come to rest on that spot. But Jeff will go over that on Thursday. Now, exception number 2, when the ball was played from the putting green, accidentally hits any person, animal movable obstruction, including another ball in motion. That's an important little one to keep in mind on the putting green. The stroke doesn't count, and the original ball must be replaced on that spot. So this is a cancel and replay. This is a good clarification. We're going to see a couple things here. So we have some clarifications here to this exception number 2. The first one says that we're going to use the known and virtually certain standard to decide if the ball on the putting green actually hits a person, animal, or movable obstruction. You think, well, that's pretty obvious, but we're going to see a video with a little bug right here. So first of all, we have to have knowledge or conclusive evidence that it actually did hit one of those things for the stroke not to count. And then we have a second clarification that says living insects are animals. So this exception of cancel and replaying the stroke applies to living insects since they are animals. Let's watch this video.
So I putted the ball. When I looked up, the ball was going at the hole, just crept in left edge.
Ooh, just gone off. He got away.
He's just showed me the video. He actually ran straight over the poor bug. Hopefully it didn't hurt him. If you knowingly hit an animal, and a bug is considered an animal, during the course of a stroke, certainly on the putting green, you have to replay it. I didn't knowingly hit it.
So the referee asked, Paul Casey's in a lot of these videos for some reason, but referee asked Paul, showed him, and Paul said, no, I didn't even know I hit it. And so referee basically said, right answer. That was fine. He had no knowledge that he had hit that, so there was no way he could cancel and replay his stroke. This is a really important model local rule. I think if you don't have this at your club events, I think you should at your course or your facility. All of the tours have this in place, and we have it in place at the section for the section events on our hard card. And before this was in place, the Paul Casey example, had he known that he hit that bug, he was in a penalty situation if he didn't cancel and replay. All right, so the exception is going to apply except for these cases. The ball accidentally hits the player or the club used by the player to make the stroke. And I'll tell you why this is in the model local rule. And some of you probably know this, and I hope I'm citing the right thing. I think it was Jesper Parnevik. If Tom Karpus is on this call, he'll know. Jesper Parnevik had a little tap-in putt, and he went to tap it in, and it did a little power lip out and came back and hit him on the foot. Well, without this model local rule in place, guess what? Jesper Parnevik gets to cancel and replay with no penalty. He essentially gets a mulligan. So they wanted to close that loophole, which the first part of this model local rule does. And then the second part of it is that any animal defined as a loose impediment, that is worms, insects, and similar animals that can be easily removed, if you hit one of those, a stroke counts and the ball, you play the ball as it lies. So whether you can see it or not, running over a little bug doesn't, number one, it doesn't entitle you to cancel and replay anymore, nor does it force you to cancel and replay. So this is a great model local rule that I would encourage you, if you have any kind of a hard card or local rules that you put in place for your events at your facility, you want this to be one of them. MLR D7. Exception 2 does not apply for these two cases. Ball in motion hits another ball at rest or ball marker on the putting green, or it accidentally hits a flag stick. Let's look at these. So if a ball in motion hits another ball at rest or a ball marker on the putting green, the stroke does count and the ball gets played as it lies. No penalty unless it's stroke play. For a ball in motion accidentally hitting a flag stick or a person attending the flag stick, that's going to be covered by Rule 13, not this rule. But again, I'll tell you, it's an accidental deflection, so there's no penalty. And here's our penalty statement. Playing from where ball came to rest when stroke does not count is playing from a wrong place. This is just an interpretation that's reinforcing the idea that if the stroke was canceled, whether by an opponent in match play or does not count, as we saw here in looking at this rule, if it's one of those situations where you have to cancel and replay, if the player, the stroke's not counted, but if the player doesn't replace the ball and instead plays from where it came to rest because they didn't know, he or she's played from a wrong place, and that penalty is going to apply. This video there's a little moth right here where this arrow is. This is Padraig Harrington. Let's see what happens.
Let's have a look here. He thinks it's hit a moth here. Let's have a look. There's that moth, and it comes. The ball went in, but it definitely was the reason the moth took off again was because the ball hit the moth.
The ball was going into the lid. You know what? This could be a second apart, but it looked really slow. The butterfly kind of went away.
Yeah, so I'm sorry again, the audio wasn't great there, but Padraig was calling it a butterfly. And at the time, I think this model local rule was not in effect. So there could have been a cancel and replay for Padraig without the model local rule in effect. And then he, by not doing that, he hadn't really finished the hole. So I think with the model local rule in effect, there'd be no question. It's fine that it hits that moth. But this was another instance. They kind of needed to close that, not a loophole per se, but just a trap, eliminate that trap for a player. All right, regarding the video we just saw of Padraig Harrington, which of the following is false? We're going to look for the false statement. With no local rules in effect, if it's known or virtually certain that the ball hit the moth, the stroke does not count, and the original ball or another ball must be replaced on the original spot and replayed. That's a true statement. With the local rule in effect, if it is known or virtually certain the ball hit the moth, the stroke counts and the ball is holed. Yep, that's fine. If it's not known or virtually certain that the ball hit the moth, then the stroke always counts, and the ball is holed whether or not that's in effect. Okay, the stroke always counts and the ball is holed whether or not it is known or virtually certain. That one does not sound right, and it is D. C, at first I had to read that a couple times, but that it's actually D is the false statement. Okay, that's rule 11, accidental deflections. All right, now we're going to get into the deliberate stuff. And we've only got 15 minutes, so I might go through this a little quickly. All I'm going to tell you is 11.2 and 11.3, it's worth kind of looking at on your own. And if you're in the middle of the season and you get a rules request at your facility, it's worth looking this up because this can kind of get intertwined in a person's mind. 11.2 is going to apply when it's known or virtually certain that a player's ball in motion was deliberately deflected or stopped by a person. So we have two things here. We have deliberate is part 1 and deflection or stopped is part 2. Both those things have to happen for this rule to apply. Have a little internal definition of what this means. If a person, we have 3 parts to this, a person deliberately touches the ball in motion. Tee shot, for right, going right. Ball hits over near the concession area. It's rolling along the cart path, and this friendly spectator kind of boots the ball back in bounds. This cart path, there's a white line, that was the OB line, and this spectator gives a friendly kick to the ball. That was deliberate. If the ball in motion hits any equipment or other object, then any person, such as the player's caddy, or that a player deliberately positioned in a particular location so that that equipment, object, or person might deflect the ball in motion, we've got a problem. If they deliberately left something there so that it might deflect or stop the ball. Okay, here's a little interpretation we have. This rule is going to apply to a situation where a player did not initially position the equipment, other object, or person for the purpose of deflecting it, but once positioned by the player, he or she realizes it may deflect or stop the ball and deliberately leaves it there. An example of where a player would get a penalty. After raking a bunker, a player places the rake between the putting green and the bunker, but without any thought of it influencing the ball at that point. The player who now has a downhill putt towards the bunker realizes the rake might stop his or her ball and plays it without first moving it. So now they've made a deliberate decision to leave it there. The player putts and the ball is stopped by the rake. That's a penalty situation. One thing about 11.2 is you have to take the action, the deliberate action, and there has to be a deflection. A little different when we get to 11.3. So if ball in motion hits, here's our thing about a ball in motion hitting equipment or other object. Our exception is if it's a ball marker or a ball at rest before that ball went into motion. Exception 2 does not apply here. It doesn't apply when the ball deliberately deflected or stopped a match play with no reasonable chance it can be holed. This is the Jordan Spieth exception. So an opponent's ball in motion that's deliberately deflected or stopped at a time when there's no reasonable chance it can be holed, and when the ball needed to be holed to tie the hole, that's covered by Rule 3.2 being like this. The Jordan Spieth exception.
There is Louis' ball in motion there at the 12th. And you'll see Spieth come in and just sweep it away.
So without that exception, that would be a penalty situation, but that's okay in match play. And if we're going to talk about having a ball or ball marker move before a stroke is made because it might help or interfere, we're going to look at that when we get to Rule 15.3. The rule does not contemplate that. All right, when a penalty applies to a player is going to get the general penalty if he or she deliberately deflects or stops any ball in motion. Doesn't matter if it's the player's own ball or a ball played by an opponent or played by another player in stroke play. Deliberate and the deflection happens. We do have an exception here that for a ball moving in water, there's no penalty. We can lift the ball to take relief. That's fine, whether it's temporary water or a penalty area. Common sense exception. And in foursomes and four ball, the action of the partner is treated as action by the player. Pick your partners carefully. All right. So now where do we play the ball from? You can't play it as it lies. If it's known or virtually certain it's been deliberately deflected or stopped, we're going to see now how to proceed. Where are we going to play the ball from next? Instead, the player must take relief. This is a mandatory relief procedure. Anywhere, stroke made from anywhere except the putting green and a stroke made from the putting green. We've got two categories here. All right, the player's going to take relief based on the estimated spot where the ball would have come to rest if it hadn't been deflected or stopped. Okay, we have the lady kicking the ball back in bounds. That ball was not rolling towards inbounds. It was rolling towards the concessions. Got three situations to look at here. We'll go through them one by one. Okay. The ball would have come to rest anywhere on the course except on the putting green. The player's going to drop a ball using this relief area. The reference point that you're going to pick is going to be the estimated spot where the ball would have come to rest. Again, this is just player making their best guess. Size of the relief area is always going to be 1 club length. It's going to have limits. It's going to be in the same area of the course as the reference point and must not be near the hole. Okay. If the ball played from anywhere except the putting green, played from out there somewhere, would have come to rest on the putting green, now we're going to place. We're going to use our placing procedure. Again, you can use any ball. We're going to place it on the estimated spot where it would have come to rest using our replacing procedures in Rule 14. And this one, I think this is, you're going to know the answer to this. When the ball would have come to rest out of bounds, the player must take stroke and distance relief. You know, that's the only choice for this player. All right, now we've got a stroke that's made from the putting green, and it was deliberately deflected by this other person. Stroke doesn't count. Original ball or another ball must be replaced on the original spot. This is a cancel and replay. Our penalty statement's kind of interesting. You notice how they've crossed out playing incorrectly substituted ball, because under 11.2c, this is a relief procedure. And anytime we're operating under a relief procedure, whether it's free relief or penalty relief, we can always substitute. So this was an actual typo in the rule book, and it made me feel really good that I could go in there and I could scratch something out that the USGA had written. But anyway, David Stabler's listening. He chuckles at this too. Okay, which one of the following scenarios does Rule 11.2 penalty apply to the player? And which one of these we're looking for a penalty that's going to apply to a player? Player concedes his opponent's next stroke, deliberately stops the ball while it's moving after it's gone by the hole. Nope, we know that's okay. Jordan Spieth exception. In stroke play, a player deliberately stops the tee shot of another player in the group behind his from going into a penalty area. That's a problem. B is a problem. The player lifts his ball while it's moving in temporary water in order to take free relief. Note, we saw that that's okay. The player lifts his ball while it's moving in water in a penalty area to keep it from going out of bounds and to take relief from the penalty area. That was also okay. We can, the ball that's moving in water, we're fine. Answer is B. Okay. Rule 2, important thing here is it's deliberate. It's a deliberate action, and it has to result in actually in a deflection. If it doesn't end in a deflection, there's no harm, no foul. Deliberate and deflects. All right, now 11.3 talks about moving objects. For the most part, it's going to be about moving objects out of the way, not putting stuff in the way. We're going to be moving objects out of the way, or we're going to be altering the conditions that are going to affect where a ball in motion might come to rest. So when a ball is in motion, the player must not deliberately take any of these actions to affect where that ball might come to rest. Again, it doesn't matter if it's the player's ball or another player's ball. Can't alter any physical conditions. Those actions, those prohibited actions that we saw back in 8.1, we can't do any of those things. Can't replace a divot or press down some area of turf if the ball's in motion, and it, could likely end up there. And this is an interesting one. You can't lift or move a loose impediment or removable obstruction. We're normally always allowed to remove or move loose impediments and movable obstructions, but when a ball is in motion and it can affect where that ball goes, this is a penalty situation, whether or not the ball would have hit the thing. Again, 11.3 is all about, it's an action-based rules breach. It has nothing to do with outcome. This is Camilo here. His ball's rolling back down. He sees it's rolling back down. Well, let me just tidy up and move some of these divots that are here. A divot's a loose impediment. He didn't remove a replaced divot. He could have if he had been removing a twig or a leaf, he would still be in a penalty situation. Pretty tough penalty. We have an exception here. This rule 11.3 does not apply when it comes to moving a flag stick, a ball at rest on the putting green, and other player equipment. We can move all of those things. You can always you can always lift or move a removed flag stick to get it out of the way. Ball at rest on the putting green. This was new to the 2019 code. Let's look at this.
Hazel's fourth shot. No, hitting on the foot, it's not careful.
That's so, wasn't it?
So that's allowed now. That was a little different back when, but now we're allowed to move a ball at rest on the putting green, and you saw that player run up and mark his ball, and then also had to kind of hop out of the way. And you can move any other player equipment. Left your bag laying in the wrong spot, see a ball's going that direction, you can move it. But we can't move as a ball at rest anywhere else on the course except the putting green, and you can't move a ball marker that's anywhere on the course. Doesn't apply for removing the flag stick from the hole while ball's in motion. That's covered under 13.2, and we know that's fine. Penalty statement here, general penalty. And here's a nice interpretation. It talks about the outcome does not really matter. The outcome of the action is irrelevant. So the player is going to be in breach of this rule even if the deliberate action does not affect where the ball comes to rest. Doesn't matter what the outcome is. You took a deliberate action to affect it. General penalty, here's some good examples. Player's ball lies at the bottom of the slope. The player makes a stroke, and while the ball is rolling back down the slope, the player presses down a raised piece of turf for the purpose of preventing the ball from coming to rest in a bad lie. Player believes, second example, player believes a rake lying on the ground may stop or deflect another player's ball in motion, so the player lifts the rake. Might be trying to be a good guy, might be just thinking, the ball needs to end up where it's going to end up. But that's a penalty situation. Doesn't matter. The outcome is irrelevant. Good example of when there's no penalty would include when a player's ball lies at the bottom of the slope. They make a stroke. The ball starts to roll back down, but the player is unaware that the ball was returning to that area, and they press down a raised piece of turf without any intent to affect the ball, but just because they always repair divots and press things down. They were unaware. Good example here, again, our friend Paul Casey. This is at Pebble Beach on the 14th hole, I believe. He hit the shot. He wasn't even paying attention. He went ahead and tapped down the divot that he made before he even knew the ball was coming back there. And it comes back literally and goes right through the spot he just played from. he was kind of bemoaning the fact that he sort of chunked it and was fixing that little chunk mark and not even thinking the ball was coming back. So this interpretation tells us that that's okay. He was not aware that it was going to have any effect. Partner statement. Action of the partner, treated as action by the player. I am you and you are me. Pick your partners wisely. And that's 11.3. Whoo, Matt, 1 minute to spare. Don't have time for many questions.
Well, thank you, Alice, for that great presentation. If anyone does have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask them.
I know I plowed through that quickly, you guys. Hopefully a lot of that was familiar. I know for myself, the language in Rule 8 about the conditions affecting the stroke, when the new rules code first came out, it's like, what is this? And then once I read through, it's like, oh yeah, all of these things make sense. This is familiar. And then always that stuff with the ball in motion when it's 11.2 and 11.3. Like I said, I always refresh myself on that. And the big difference, 11.2, you know, you have to have a deliberate act and a deflection and an outcome. It's the action and the outcome. And in 11.3, it's just the action, and it's usually moving things out of the way. And it's one of the few times, probably the only time I can think of where we're not allowed to move a loose impediment or movable obstruction. If that ball's in motion coming back to that area or going to an area, you can't pick that stuff up. You can't move that branch or whatever. So, but good stuff. Hopefully most of it does not happen to you or at your facility. On Thursday, we're going to have Jeff Kitty presenting Rule 14, and Rule 14 is all about procedures for the ball, everything from lifting, you know, marking, lifting, cleaning, replacing, dropping in a relief area. One of my favorites, 14.5, the eraser rule. We can correct a lot of mistakes that we make. Playing from a wrong place, unfortunately, is also in there in 14.7. But anyway, it's well worth listening in on Thursday to what Jeff has to say. Hope to see you all back on Thursday.
Good job, Alice.
Thanks, Clarky. I only got lost a couple times in that plethora of slides.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Alice, and we'll see everybody on Thursday.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Matt.
Okay, take care.
You could